We're joined now by our Senior Advisor for Foreign Policy and National Security, Rick Grenell. And Rick, I want to go right to you on this because in the midst of the war in Ukraine and the Russian aggression there's a lot of other moves going on around the world. And one that could be announced this week, which, again, a lot of our listeners, it's not taking the forefront in any news, but it is there buried. And is the Biden administration could announce this week that we have come to an agreement to re-enter the Iranian nuclear deal, the 2 pages of bullet points in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA. And they are admitting that this would be one of those secondary issues would be that, well, this will unleash Iranian oil for the U.S. market.
Look, there is no possible way that we can have an Iran deal without cutting a deal with the Russians. Now, think about that. The priority for the Biden administration is to get any deal in Iran. And in order to get a deal in Iran, you have to deal with the Russians and you have to make sure they're not too angry with you. What does that mean? That means that when the Russians are doing their offensive moves in Ukraine and the Biden team cares more about an Iran deal, they are literally letting the Russians get away with murder because they're more focused on an Iran deal. Where is the DC media? I want to call out people like Julie Pace from the Associated Press, who fails every time to keep the pressure on the Biden administration. She's the one who's constantly saying we don't have a problem with supply issues when it comes to energy because she's more concerned about climate change. And she puts forward arguments about climate change that are somehow a higher priority than gas prices that Americans are having. She's dismissed the idea that buying oil from Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, or possibly Iran is a better idea than the American government allowing Americans to supply our energy. We have the ability, as Senator Manchin said, but we are not supplying the energy that we need because somehow we're afraid of the environmentalists' claims that it's going to harm climate change.
You know, Rick, I pointed out early in our broadcast, and I want to get your sense of this because to me this is a really troubling statement that came out of the foreign minister for Russia, Sergei Lavrov, regarding the Iran nuclear deal. And this is what he said. This has been reported on Saturday. He said that Moscow wants a written U.S. guarantee that it's very important here, that its trade, investment, and military technical cooperation with Iran would not be hindered by Western sanctions imposed by its invasion of Ukraine. That is what the Russians are demanding from the United States as a precondition for this horrible Iran deal.
You know, Jay, this is the problem when we're negotiating, when the Biden administration is negotiating and not putting America first. We're putting consensus with the Europeans first. We're putting consensus with others at the UN first. Biden cares more about having a deal where other countries say, yes, we are with you and we're going to sign off on this agreement, rather than protecting America. You cannot be negotiating an Iran deal right now with the Russians because the Russians obviously have a whole other offense going on in Ukraine, and it's literally not something that Americans are going to benefit from if our government is trading policies between Iran and Ukraine with the Russians, and that's exactly what's happening.
And Iran's foreign minister, said he would not allow any foreign elements to undermine its national interest, and he was waiting for further explanation. So this has gotten very complicated very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, Rick, one thing I wanted to ask you about was specific to knowing this. We now know the Biden team sent a delegation to Venezuela, and just to kind of isolate that for a second. Venezuela, we stopped buying oil and gas from Venezuela. They've been isolated. They've had to rely on Russia and Iran and China. And it'd be one thing, I think, if we were trying to re-engage Venezuela and say that maybe this will cause political change. People there are living in squalor. It's almost become like a failed state. But we're coming to it seems like instead what's happening is we're coming and begging to come up with a deal, which is not going to change Venezuela politically. It's not going to provide more human rights to Venezuelans or really improve the day-to-day life of the Venezuelan people.
Look, there's been a lot of reports about President Trump sending me to Mexico to negotiate a secret deal that we were having with the Venezuelans, a conversation that we were having. I haven't really ever confirmed that publicly, but it did happen. And I flew to Mexico to negotiate a deal where the Maduro team would leave in order to continue with a bilateral relationship with the Venezuelans and move the Venezuelans forward and clean up the mess that Maduro has put in Venezuela. We felt like we needed to move on. This is a opposite policy from the Biden team, where they're engaging with Maduro, and there's even been some senior officials at the White House who say our policy is different than Trump because we are going to engage with Maduro and we're going to negotiate with him. Again, I go back to, why are we buying oil from Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and possibly Iran when we have the ability to supply energy ourselves here in America? Let's do it ourselves.
Andy, I was going to ask you, historically, when you start, when our leader of the United States government goes to the extreme of going to dictators,
yes,
to get what is an energy for the United States, energy we actually have. But historically, when leaders have done that, it does not end well.
No, I mean, and Ambassador Grenell, I think, would agree with me. This brings back Munich 1938. Chamberlain going to Hitler and saying, let's work it out, eat up the Czechoslovakians, give them the Sudetenland, and he comes back waving that stupid piece of paper saying peace in our time, or was it peace for a time? There's some question about that, but that's not what you do. You don't go sucking up the dictators, coming back with concessions that dictators make, which are no good. And what did it get us ultimately? War.
I was going to say the reality is that we've had these conversations in the 70s and 80s because we were trapped. We were not able to provide enough energy ourselves. We needed to import energy, and we had to deal with a whole bunch of bad actors. I didn't like it then, and I certainly don't like it now, but something fundamental has changed. And that is, we can supply our own energy. We can become an energy exporter. This is unbelievable. It happened under Donald Trump. It's not like we're talking about pie in the sky. It's not like we're talking about something that hasn't happened. We did it. As Donald Trump says, not only were we an energy exporter, but we were dominant in it. We were able to really change the whole game of foreign policy. What Joe Biden is doing is laying down for the environmentalists. And instead of supplying here, it's looking the other way as the oil pumped in Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, all of these other places, they still have the same environmental concerns that our environmentalists have here. But Joe Biden isn't looking at that. He's pretending that somehow we have to buy oil, buy energy from dictators, and we don't have to.
Rick, as always, we appreciate you joining us on the broadcast. So check out ACLJ.org as well. You know, people like Rick and Mike Pompeo are writing weekly for ACLJ. It's all there at ACLJ.org.